All right, admins, we're going to go over the Moose Legionnaire Fellowship recommendation form. Something I want to make sure that we're doing right is the process, because we have too many people being denied because certain steps weren't taken. And we don't want anybody to also lose out because they're having conversations about who has been eligible or recommended or sent in. Um, this information is highly confidential, and one of the problems we've had in the past is people discussing it, outside of the actual meetings where people should be talking about it. The reason we keep this confidential, which we've had this situation happen a couple times over the last few years, is two people in a lodge get meet the minimum requirements, and then the lodge sends both in, or only sends one in because really one was only worth really should have gotten it, and the person who was qualified for the basics but then didn't get recommended or get sent in gets upset and their feelings hurt. They should have never have known that in the first place. So we don't discuss that with the nominees for various reasons. Um, Also, I want to make sure that everybody understands that anybody involved with this process that possibly speaks up and speaks out of terms and lets information out, it could jeopardize their fellow that they may already have, or their pilgrim. That goes up to the pilgrims also. It could affect women's degrees if they have a degree, because now we do have administrators that are women, and so they have access to that. So administrators, you guys are the gatekeepers to this information, so make sure it's being given to the proper people and going the proper procedures. Again, this is highly confidential, and we shouldn't be discussing it with anybody other than the individuals that need to be discussed with. Um, so let's go over how the meeting should go to start with. All fellows and pilgrims in the lodge have the right to be at the meeting to discuss the nomination forms and moving on. You can find that information in LCL when you go down, just like you're doing your daily drawing books or your mailing labels. You can go in there and pick out by gender. You can pick out people with fellowships and with pilgrims, and then export that. That way, you know who's eligible to be there, and they need to be notified that that there's a meeting when that date is set up. Um, so we need to make sure we're notifying them all, because we're getting too many people that are saying, "Well, I'm a pilgrim and I didn't even know they had a fellowship um, uh, 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 nominee being discussed." So that's an issue there. Also, the number of fellows you're able to put in matters as well. For up to 400 members in a lodge, you can enter one. If you have 401 members or more, two, and so on and so forth. But I don't think there's anybody that we have enough lodges out there that has three. Most of you are going to fall in that first category, because there are a few lodges that I know that have 800 or 900 members, and I was looking up, and even they, when it comes to actual men members, they end up falling short. They have more women. They're falling around 370 or so. You can find that out also by going into LCL and doing the export same report, do a gender, pull out into Excel, and then categorize all the male and female, and you'll see how many males you have, and make sure you have, if you're sending in more than one, make sure you have more than 400 male members in your lodge. Um, in this email, also with the qualifiers, you'll get who qualifies. You'll also get this 7-page recommendation form, which we're going to go through also. Uh, Again, I want to remind everybody that just because someone met the minimum requirements does not mean they're going to get recommended for a fellow. The minimum requirements are just that, the minimum requirements. The minimum requirements on there that off the top of my head I can think of, first of all, they have to be in the Moose Legion for at least 5 years. Or I'm sorry, they have to be a member for 5 years. They have to be in the Moose Legion for at least 1 year. Um, they've had to have sponsored at least one Moose Legionnaire in their lifetime. And there's a caveat to this next part they changed this past year. they have to have sponsored somebody from May 1st to September 30th of this previous year. So just this few months past. Unless they are in the 25 club, then that part will be waived. Then they don't have to have sponsored somebody in the last spring to summer. Now, to get on the forms, you need to have at least 4 fellows or pilgrims on the committee for it to be a quorum. It does, and there's a space for them to fill out. If your lodge does not have enough fellows or pilgrims to make up that committee, you can fill it out with the rest of your board of officers, starting with the administrator, president, vice president, treasurer. Do those first and work your way down. But they're looking at these forms much more closely. If your lodge has, say it has a handful of fellows and a couple of pilgrims, and it's all 4 officers that are only ones that are on here, and they're not a fellow or a pilgrim, they're going to be asking why didn't you at least have a couple on there. So if your lodge has some fellows or pilgrims, they need to be involved in this process. The first page is pretty straightforward and basic. It just wants the name, the member's ID, some basic information on the front. I won't go over it too much. Then it does have the section of who's recommending, and it does ask if they are, once their signature, by the way, signature, not printed, not computerized. This all has to be original paperwork documents that I receive. MID number, if they're a fellow or not. And if they are a pilgrim, then yes, they are also a fellow because they had to be a fellow first. And if not, then the current lodge office, if they're having to fill the rest of the quorum out. Now's where we get to the harder stuff. All these questions. Now, again, we just discussed what the minimum requirements were, but they have to hit at least 7 of these 16 questions to be considered. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I'm not going to go over each one because they're pretty self-explanatory. But if you're considering on sending somebody in and they've only hit 7 as a bare minimum on here, details matter. Details matter, period, anyways. Some of these are just yes/no questions, but some of them want more information. So if it says, have they helped in the lodge, inside the lodge, don't just put yes, or don't put yes just does dishes in the kitchen. Put in more information. This individual helps at bingo and has been helping for the last, 6 years every night at bingo. Or, every year we have a car show and he's been the chairperson. If they're the retention committee chairman, put that information in and document what they've done. Don't just put yes or no. More information is going to help. We're getting too many that are getting turned down, and the lodge gets upset and say, well, we recommended so-and-so, but when it comes down to it, it's just basic information that's missing and not enough detail, and that's why they're not being considered. I will say this while I'm turning the pages here, that I don't have anything to do with who gets approved or not approved or picked or not picked. My job is just to verify some of this information. So if you're being very basic, or I don't know the individual and it says they've done all this stuff, you're probably going to get a phone call from me wanting more details. Some lodges, I know some of your very active members, especially if they're officers, but I don't know everybody, especially in the big lodges. On page 6 at the end, there's a blank section down the bottom. Make sure you don't fill that out because that says it's for territory managers' comments on this recommendation. Again, on this recommendation, I'm not recommending yes or no. I'm just putting in there, yes, this has been verified, or no, as a matter of fact, I know that this one is not true. That's what that's there for. On page 5 is for the fellowship degree recognition lodge committee attendance roster. That needs to be filled out just like page 4. Also, make sure they have their printed name, they print it out, their Moose ID, and their signature. Again, it has to be their signature. They can't print their name on this section. On page 6 and 7, the last 2 pages, I highly recommend you guys read this in detail. Read it twice. There's going to be some more information in the email that I'm sending because there's some very important things in here that if we skip or miss could lead them to not getting their fellow as well. Here it says the minimum requirements on here that for them to be considered. Doesn't mean they're getting it. They meet those minimum requirements. It also tells you about how many mail members you have to submit more than one person. It talks about the recommendation committee, and it talks about the timelines. There is a deadline on this. This deadline is December 9th. You have to have this in the mail and postmarked by December 9th. If it's not postmarked by December 9th, I will not accept it. You can't call me on the 9th and say it's coming. It has to be postmarked by that point, because I'm sending all that information along up to Moose International. They're going to see that postmarked date. Excuse me. Again, this can't be emailed to me, photocopied, and sent. It has to be the originals with the original signatures on it and mailed to my address. My address, of course, is on the state officers list, but I will add that in with this email. And of course, if you forget, you can always contact me or text me, and I'll send my address to you again. So again, those 2 pages are very important. Also, for any lodge out there that has gotten an email or sees that there's someone's not on the list that they think should be qualified, please do your due diligence first and see what the minimum requirements are before you call me, because too often I'm getting, well, Bob Smith should have been nominated. And then we find out that, he's not, and they didn't do their due diligence. What happens a lot is we forget that if they're not in the 25 club or higher, that they've had to have sponsored somebody in the last, May, June, July, August, September, in those 5 months. And they didn't. Or for the same reason they consider, well, Bob Smith was eligible last year and he's not this year. Well, it's because maybe he sponsored somebody a year ago and didn't sponsor somebody this year. So we have to look at those things. I quite often get, Bob Smith's been very active and does a lot of work around the lodge. There's no reason why he shouldn't be considered. And then we find out he's never sponsored someone in the Moose Legion. That's a requirement. So again, do your due diligence first and verify that they meet their requirements. And then if they've met those minimum requirements and haven't been considered, then give me a holler. All right, that went on way too long, but we need to be a little detailed on that. Again, big important part, lots of details. Don't be basic. Don't just say yes or no. Make sure you have some fellows and pilgrims involved in the process if you can, and have that mailed back to me by December 9th. December 9th. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.